Welcome to WBC Faster Together, the LinkedIn Live series of the Women Business Collaborative. I'm Gwen Young, Chief Operating Officer of the WBC. And today we are joined by Khalil Smith, VP of Inclusion, Diversity and Engagement, and Liz Doherty, Senior Director and Associate General Counsel at Akamai Technologies. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of over 70 women business organizations and hundreds of business leaders, building a movement to achieve equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. Through collaboration, advocacy, action, and accountability, we are mobilizing thousands to create momentum and accelerate the pace of change. We live our commitment to DEI, and members of our leadership, a diverse board of directors, advisory and leader councils, include more than 34% people of color. Please check the chat for our 9 action initiatives through which we aim to accelerate change, and join our movement at wbcollaborative.org. Each week in this series, we offer different ways to advocate change and accelerate impact by presenting data, research, and best practices, by lifting up the power of men and women's voices for change, and by showcasing the importance of cross-generational collaboration and the allyship of men in the movement. Today, we want to talk about diverse leadership and inclusivity, and specifically as it relates to all industries, but as Akamai is kind of leading in this space. So let's start off by talking about the word equity in DE&I. Khalil, why is this important, and what does it mean to you and to Akamai?
Yeah, I mean, why it's important, and we hear it a lot, as folks think about kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, belonging, and inclusion, or diversity, justice, and inclusion, right? A lot of those terms come together, and they mean somewhat similar things, but there's a lot of value in kind of separating those out and being really deliberate about it. And so equity is really, for us, around fairness. It's around ensuring that, we know that we have different starting points and different obstacles, but that we want to provide equal access to resources, and that we want to view those resources through a slightly, I would call it almost an asymmetric lens. And I'll give you some examples of that, right? We have mental health resources, even though not everyone may take advantage of those. We're building in a lot of instances for the minority, but making things available for the community. And so equity is about recognizing that, again, we're starting from different places, we're running into different obstacles, but we want to provide a similar path and similar opportunity and similar endpoints if that's where people want to get to. And we believe that that's inextricably tied to inclusion. I don't know that you can have inclusion if you don't feel like there's a degree of fairness or equity. And so we've married those together. And as you were talking about my title, we've really kind of pulled out engagement separately and said, diversity and inclusion are in a lot of ways the potential energy of a team. You have to have those as the starting blocks. You have to kind of set those up. And then ultimately engagement is what allows WBC to go from, oh, this is wonderful, I like a bunch of people here, to we are making things happen, right? We're creating a movement, we're changing things. And that's really what we're about at Akamai, saying, wow, we've done the hard work to continue to build better representation, to continue to build an inclusive environment. And how are we pointing that energy and that passion in a direction to help make life better for billions of people, billions of times a day, through all of the work and the efforts that we do.
It's kind of that link, as you were saying, between sort of a quality of opportunity and sort of a quality of results or quality of outcome, if you will. It's like harnessing and driving that, which kind of leads us into that sort of second question, which I think, Liz, I want to bring you in on. We know DEI has improved business performance, but we haven't talked about how it impacts or shifts like workplace language, challenges, norms, and solutions. Can you talk a bit about the context and kind of this link it to this idea of inclusion? Like, what does this link to business performance? What does it do? And what are some of the things Akamai is doing?
Yeah, no, sure. So I think, at its heart, when people can be themselves at work, they can contribute at their highest level, right? So, for instance, if someone's gay, if they don't have to hide, what they and their partner were doing over the weekend, or, the fact that they're in a family planning mode and looking at options, right? They're not distracted by that, right? They're not distracted by worrying about what other people think. So they can, bring an experience to work that is full, right? And then in turn, their experience at work is more engaging, right? It's more exciting to them. And I think importantly also for leaders, in my experience, I think a more diverse and inclusive workspace develops skills, right? It develops leaders because, they have to develop multicultural competencies. They have to develop, empathy. They have to, be creative about their decision making. And I think primarily it's because they're listening to multiple points of view, and they're not surrounded by yes people, right? They're not surrounded by people who are going to just tell them what they want to hear. They're going to have different viewpoints that say, hey, maybe the best thing for Akamai's business is to do X, Y, Z. So I think we've been doing a lot of training and development of our people around developing those skills within our leadership, and also, empowering people to speak up and have a voice in their teams. And I think it's really done wonders for our employees and their level of engagement, as well as the business performance.
Yeah, Khalil, I'd love to hear, and sort of both of you, a bit more about some of the things you're actually, doing in that space. You're talking about the training, Liz talking a little bit about the training, empowering people's voices, creating that space where you can sort of be yourself and be your best professional self. What are some of the other steps Akamai is taking, Khalil?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them. And that's part of why I love partnering with Liz, because she's always either building something or pushing me to do something. We do that across the entire organization. And so, I've heard the phrase before, there's no silver bullet, but there is silver buckshot. And I think we've really put that in place at Akamai, that we're not looking for just a single thing to say, we're going to roll out this program and then that's going to solve for everything. And so we've really tried to embed it in so many different things that we do. So to Liz's point about training, over the last 2.5 years, we've taken over 90% of our employees through training around growth mindset, which is all around experimenting and learning from others and valuing progress, around how to mitigate bias, how to identify it and call it out, and what you can do to build better systems, around how to be inclusive and the neuroscience of inclusion and what does that mean and how do we interact with one another, around how to be an ally and how to speak up if you see something or you're experiencing something. We have prioritized from talent acquisition, diverse slates of applicants, diverse panels of interviewers, constant tracking, constant data, constant reporting, having these conversations at the board level and with our C-suite and with our managers, and like all of these things are examples. And then you have the multitude of things that our employees are doing when they're saying, hey, I love that training, but how do we make it even more impactful? Or how do we bring it back to our meeting? Constant conversations around the various dimensions of diversity as well. So if we think about, okay, well, now we've got folks that are working remotely, we've got folks that are going back into the office, we've got folks that are doing a little bit of both. It's been so ingrained in our organization that folks are thinking, well, how do I make sure that I'm not leaving certain people behind? Or how do I need to stand up other things? And then one that I'd be remiss not to mention is our employee resource groups. They are an incredible point of advocacy and support for our employees. And Liz was a key part of standing up one of our employee resource groups, one of our largest and most kind of fervent. And when Liz was talking before about, it challenges you to be multicultural and challenges you as a leader to not be surrounded by yes people. There's a pro and a con to that, right? Because Liz has built an entire infrastructure of people that say, hey, Khalil, I think we need to do this differently. I think we need to push here, but also has built a community of folks that help us navigate some of the real challenges of the world. Because Akamai doesn't exist in a bubble. We exist in our ecosystem, and we have the challenges of Ukraine and the challenges, like all of these different things that are going on that our employees help tell us, this is what I think you should be doing. This is how we're feeling. This is how you should be reacting. So all of those things, either at the kind of company level or at the employee level or at the team level, there's just a multitude of them. And I am constantly impressed and constantly surprised in some ways, but they all row in the same direction, which is incredibly powerful.
I'd love to hear from both of you, Liz, and Khalil, you brought it up too, kind of who the leadership people are, because you mentioned that this goes up to the board level, right? And so one of the topics the WBC talks about and people talk about, and that's sort of the diversification of boards. And the second thing that's happening is sort of like these new sort of tech leaders, like across companies, not just Akamai, but in other companies, and how important leadership buy-in, but leadership kind of roles and what types of leaders are kind of involved in this, so that it's both sort of at the top and with the teams and with the employees, as you said. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what does that look like, the board level, what's the leadership looking like, and that buy-in, because that's so important, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm already off mute, so I'll touch on it a little bit, and then Liz would love to hear your perspective here. Again, at different levels. So at the board level, our board is about half women and or people of color, right? And obviously some intersection in there as well. So when we think about, is this a priority? But what's interesting is that it's not a priority only for those folks, right? They bring a unique perspective, of course, but our entire board is asking, what are you doing? How are you making decisions? What are the tactics you're putting in place? What is the overall strategy? So my boss, our chief HR officer, and I are regularly updating the board. And not only are we pushing them, but they're pushing us to say, not enough, keep going. How do you challenge it even more? We about a year ago tied a certain segment of executive compensation into some of our representation and inclusion and engagement, which you can read about in some of our disclosures. So really kind of putting some skin in the game. And then similarly, our CEO is a gentleman by the name of Tom, Dr. Tom Layton. So his kind of core group is called the T staff. They are engaged in this conversation on a regular basis. And that for me is what's so valuable, is that this is woven into our business priorities. It's woven into our conversation around succession planning. It's not a line item that we talk about separately. It is a facet of every part of the dialogue.
Yeah, and I would add to that just to say, we also, I think representation goes a long way, right? So we have our chief marketing officer, Kim Salem Jackson, is a great leader. Kate Prouty, newly promoted to our CIO position, and that helps. What I think of it as like inclusion by design in a way, right? Where you have people at the table who may not always, but maybe more likely to have a certain lived experience or perspective that allows us to be thinking about inclusion early, often, always, and that's a great, powerful thing in terms of, who's at the table.
No, that sounds like it. So I want to sort of stay with this for a second, and then I kind of want to come back on some sort of Akamai specifics. But what are maybe Khalil, you want to start? What are the top 3 to 5 things other companies can do? What's the secret sauce here, or what's your recommendation if you want to keep some of the secret sauce to yourself?
No, we want to share it, honestly. We, as much as possible, we talk about being catalysts for change. And so we want to share everything that we do. And we try to get a lot of that out in our annual report. We talk about kind of 4 parts of our IDE strategy, if you will. The ACTS model is what we call it. So accountability, community, transparency, and simplicity. So accountability is about how do you actually build this into the way that you expect your leaders and your employees to operate. So do you actually care? Can someone get promoted because they've got great sales, even though they've left a trail of, bodies in their wake and nobody wants to work with them? Can you be successful in the organization, even though you don't care about any of these things? Because we're not promoting people who are really nice, but don't hit any of their business objectives. So these 2 things need to move in unison. We need to be thinking about how are we supporting our employees? How are we building in representation? These are not kind of nice to-dos. They are a part of the work that needs to get done. Community is about how do you bring people together? Because in some ways, we're absolutely creating spaces where folks who are similarly minded can come together and have a conversation. But at the end of the day, we are one Akamai. We are one organization of close to 10,000 employees that are trying to do the best possible work that we can. So building that community and those shared resources and that collaboration and those shared goals is incredibly powerful. The transparency is about visibility. Share the data, share the wins, share the opportunities. And then simplicity. This has a tendency, especially as you get larger, to get complex. And people say, well, I don't understand all of the intersectionality, and I don't get all of the history of this thing, and I don't understand all of this. So I'm just going to opt out. I'll leave that to the experts. But if we can keep it as simple as possible and say, here are the things that we genuinely need to be doing, that becomes incredibly important. And I will just say, build better systems. That is the thing that I think we can all do. Because a lot of times when folks ask, and this is probably maybe the most controversial thing I'll say, and I know some people will disagree, I think the biggest thing we can do is get out of the way of our really talented employees. I have very rarely met people that actually need a bunch of additional support. What they need is for you to get out of the way, right? What they need is for you to remove the obstacles that say a leader looks like X and you don't look like X, therefore you can't be a leader here. They're already demonstrating leadership skills. So what they need is for you to realize that leadership is a multitude of things, or to get promoted, you can come from a lot of different backgrounds, or it's not how I look, it's how I perform. So a lot of that is just getting ourselves out of the way and allowing people, as Liz said, to show up, be themselves, and shine without feeling like they need to fit into a particular box.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Liz, I'd love to hear some of yours. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, sure. I was just going to say, and I think what, I think one of the things is have humility, on an individual level, right? Listen to the women and non-binary people in your organization, for instance, right? And don't assume what the challenges are or what the experiences are. We do a lot of surveying, a lot of conversation at Akamai, and I think it helps. I think the other thing is be willing to take risks, right? On people, on programs, on ways of making decisions that may be not what you've done before, right? Because if we're always looking towards the next, if we're always looking to make a decision about that promotion based on how we've always done it, I don't know, right? Are we going to promote and retain, a diverse staff in the same way? I think, Khalil said it well about transparency and stuff, but measure, right? Measure and apply the same rigor to issues around the attraction, retention, and promotion of a diverse slate of employees with the same kind of rigor that you apply to any other business critical issue. I think that then at least you know where you stand and can brainstorm with the folks around you about how to do better.
And Gwen, I would just Liz always says things that get me thinking. When she says take risks, I'm like, we are in an industry of people that are trying to disrupt death and trying to disrupt self-driving cars and trying to disrupt the internet and trying to disrupt societies, right? Everything that the people around us are doing is about saying, how do we make it better or smaller? How do we do things that you didn't even think we could do? And yet when it comes to how we organize our teams or what we look at in terms of opportunities, we largely are mired in a lot of what we've done for an extended period of time, right? Even you have to return to the office, you have to work 40 hours a week, you have to work 5 days a week. All of these are things that if we said, you have to drive a horse-drawn buggy and carriage to get to work, people would be like, what? What are you talking about? And so all of this is just about redefining and recognizing that a lot of the systems that were built up and the way that we operate today were built at a time where women and people of color and people with disabilities and people who are neurodiverse were not the target demographic of our workforce. And if we're going to continue to operate in those ways, then let's go back to using leeches and let's go back to, asbestos being a good thing. That's just not where we are anymore. And I think when we put it in those terms, we can start to realize that it just doesn't make sense the same way it did before, if it ever made sense. And we've got to take the risk that Liz is talking about and disrupt things. And we're not there 100% yet. So please don't, all the groups that I've spoken with that are doing some good things will say we're not there yet. We've got areas to push. We want to be better, and we are no different. But I think just this mindset of the taking risks that Liz brought up is so incredibly important.
How do you, a lot of people will say this is hard. It's hard to change the way you act. It's hard to look for a diverse set of candidates. It's hard not to just kind of act the way you've always acted, right? How you were, Liz and I are lawyers, right? There's a certain way you rise up a corporate law structure. If we could disrupt that system, right? How do you deal with it's hard and bringing people along to change?
Yeah, there are a couple things. So one is to recognize that it's hard, right? If it was easy, anyone would do it. That's the point, is that it is unique and difficult. I'm not a woodworker because I don't know how to work wood. That's hard. There are people that do that really well. I think the other thing is to stop feeling like we're trying to make the right decision every single day and build better systems. So we talk a lot about things like, if you want to eat well, don't decide every day that you're going to eat a salad. Prepare your meals at the beginning of the week, right? Because on Tuesday, Tuesday, you're going to smell a burger and you're going to say, whatever, I'm going to get the burger instead of the salad. So when you can build better systems, and I think, in a lot of ways, lawyers have been a huge part of that, which is to say, hey, we're if I decide I'm going to drive 55 today and then 95 tomorrow, that is a choice that I'm making every single day. But when we create some of those rules of the road, I don't have to think about, am I going to stop at red or go at red? That is the way that we operate now. That is just a thing that we've decided to do. And navigating roads is incredibly complex, but we've put systems in place to make it easier for people to be able to do it safely. And so build better systems, and that is absolutely a great way to not have to worry.
I love it. I love it. So before we tie all this up, I'm going to ask the fun question, unrelated, and I want each of you to answer. And Khalil, you brought it up. Akamai and you both are on, that you're disrupting society, or it's disrupting self-driving cars, the one that ran away from the police officer the other day, I guess, in San Francisco. What's the one thing that excites you? What's the one thing you see on the horizon, or what's an opportunity in 2022 that you're seeing in technology or in the world? Yeah.
Oh, in the world as a whole. Oh, interesting. All right, Liz, I'm gonna have you go first because I'm thinking about this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that probably the biggest thing that excites me, and we were talking about this before we even got on the program, about it's been such a pleasure, and it continues to be a pleasure to work at a place that really is at the intersection of law, society, technology, culture, everything that's going on. So frankly, being with a great team of people that is striving to solve those problems every day is, just what I'm looking forward to continuing to do in 2022.
Gwen, how do I even go after that? There's nothing I can say. Just drop the mic. We're done. And ditto. That's all I'm gonna say. Ditto.
Ditto. Fantastic. Thank you both. I mean, thank you. And thank you for, the transparency, the measuring, the taking risks, and the way you both talked about it, and the way Akamai's laid it out with acts and everything. It's very helpful to sort of get in the mindset of this is where we are. This is where society is, and this is how we have to act. So I really, really appreciate it. I thank you both for your time today, and of course, for being a part of the Women Business Collaborative. And that's all we have time for. So we invite you to wbccollaborative.org to learn more about our initiatives, which are designed to increase women in the C-suite and boardroom, to address the underrepresentation of women in access to capital in industries like technology, and to advance a pipeline of women leaders to bring gender, pay parity, and diversity, equity, inclusion to the business landscape. Join our movement. Join us next Thursday on June 9th, and join us weekly to keep up to date on our next guest, our progress, the movement for gender parity in business, and the latest issues by following us on social media at WB Collaborative on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And have a great Thursday and happy June.